Clayton Kershaw does not say things like that. That is the first thing you need to understand. He is not the kind of veteran who performs frustration for cameras. He is not the kind of player who uses media access as a weapon against a younger teammate. In 15 years of being one of the most scrutinized players in this sport, in 15 years of press conferences and post-game availabilities and the relentless attention that follows a player of his stature, Kershaw has maintained a specific discipline around what he says publicly about the people inside his own clubhouse. That discipline collapsed last night. And it collapsed in a way that was so unexpected, so out of character, so starkly different from everything that Kershaw has represented as a public presence in this sport, that the room where he said it didn't react immediately. It just went still. The way a room goes still when something happens that it doesn't yet have the language to process. If even Shohei can't develop him, then it's over. 7 words about catcher James rushing. 7 words that arrived without warning in the middle of what should have been a standard post-game availability. 7 words that immediately raised questions not just about Rushing's future with this organization, but about what had been happening behind closed doors in a clubhouse that presents a carefully unified face to the outside world. Something had broken through that face last night. And Kershaw was the one who broke it. To understand why those words landed with the force that they did, you have to understand what James Rushing represents to this organization right now. He is not a veteran. He is not someone who arrived with a proven track record that gives him insulation from scrutiny. He is young. He is developing. He is the kind of catcher that organizations invest in not because of what he is today but because of what the projection models and the development staff and the people who watch thousands of hours of catching mechanics believe he can become. That belief has been tested this season. The errors have not been occasional. They have not been the random, isolated mistakes that every developing player accumulates over the course of a long season. They have formed a pattern. A specific, recurring pattern that opposing base runners have begun to identify and exploit. Passed balls at critical moments. Framing decisions that have cost pitchers calls they needed. Throws that have arrived too late or not at all to prevent damage that a more experienced presence behind the plate might have prevented. The pitching staff had absorbed these errors publicly without complaint. Ohtani, who works with Rushing more closely than perhaps anyone else on the roster given the nature of their battery relationship, had said nothing publicly that indicated frustration. He had approached the development of his catcher with the same focused professionalism that he brings to every aspect of his preparation. That patience, that sustained investment from the best player on the roster, had been the organizational argument for continued faith in Rushing. Kershaw invoked that argument last night. And in invoking it, he revealed that even that argument was beginning to run out of runway. The game itself had provided the context that made Kershaw's words inevitable. Rushing's errors in this particular game were not subtle. They were not the kind of mistakes that require detailed statistical analysis to identify. They happened in real time, in high-leverage moments, in the specific situations where the margin between winning and losing is measured in single pitches and single decisions. The first came in the 3rd inning. A pitch that should have been caught cleanly. A pitch that Rushing got his glove on but could not secure. The ball skipped away from him in a direction that gave the runner on third the jump he needed. The run scored. The Dodgers dugout absorbed it without visible reaction. That is what professional dugouts do. They absorb. The second came in the 6th. A framing decision on a pitch that lived on the corner of the zone. Rushing presented it in a way that pulled the umpire's eye away from where the ball actually crossed rather than toward it. The call went against the Dodgers pitcher. The at-bat extended. 2 pitches later, the damage was done. The third was the one that the cameras caught most clearly. A steal attempt in the 8th inning with the game still close enough that every out mattered. Rushing's throw arrived late. Not dramatically late. Just late enough. The kind of late that experienced catchers eliminate through the small mechanical adjustments that separate adequate from reliable. 3 moments. Across 8 innings. Each one individually survivable. Together, They told a story that was becoming impossible to not tell. Kershaw had been watching all of it. He watches everything. That is who he is as a baseball player and as a veteran presence in a clubhouse. He processes. He catalogs. He understands the game at a level that most people in the sport spend careers approaching without fully reaching. And he had been patient. By all accounts, inside the walls of the Dodgers clubhouse, Kershaw had been one of the voices advocating for continued investment in Rushing's development. He understood what the organization was trying to build. He respected the process. But patience has a shape. And last night, that shape changed. When the post-game availability began, the questions were initially about the game's broader narrative. Strategy. Pitching decisions. The standings implications of the result. Then a reporter asked about the battery. About the specific dynamic between the pitching staff and the catcher. About whether the errors of the evening were being discussed internally as a pattern that required addressing. Kershaw's answer started carefully. It started in the place where most answers from veterans start, in the measured professional language of someone who knows how to navigate a question without detonating it. And then something shifted. His voice changed register. Not dramatically. Not in a way that announced itself loudly. But the people in the room who have sat in front of Kershaw for years recognized it immediately. The slight tightening. The pause that went a beat longer than his usual pauses. The way his eyes moved down for a moment before coming back up. And then he said it. We have given James every resource available to help him develop. Including Shohei. Shohei has invested time and attention in that development that goes beyond what anyone could reasonably ask of a teammate. If even Shohei can't develop him, then it's over. The room processed it in layers. The first layer was the surface meaning. A veteran player expressing open frustration with a younger teammate's repeated errors through the vehicle of a public statement. That alone was significant. That alone was a story. The second layer arrived a few seconds later. The specific invocation of Ohtani. The framing of Ohtani's investment in Rushing's development as the final, ultimate resource that the organization had deployed. And the suggestion that if that resource had failed to produce the necessary results, then the conclusion to be drawn was terminal rather than correctable. The third layer was the one that made the room go completely still. Kershaw had not said this lightly. Kershaw does not say anything lightly. Which meant that whatever had happened in that clubhouse, whatever conversations had occurred behind closed doors, whatever frustrations had accumulated over weeks and months of absorbing errors in silence, had reached a point where the discipline that Kershaw applies to his public presence was no longer sufficient to contain it. Something real had broken through. And now it was in the room. Recorded. Circulating. Impossible to take back. The follow-up questions came quickly. Was he calling for Rushing to be removed from the roster? Kershaw pulled back slightly. Not from the substance of what he had said. From the characterization. That's not my decision to make. I'm not the manager. I'm not the GM. I'm a pitcher who has watched this season unfold and who answered a question honestly. What happens next is above my level. Was he concerned about the impact of his statement on Rushing personally? Here Kershaw paused longest. The question clearly landed somewhere real. James is a young player who is trying. I want to be clear about that. This is not about effort. It has never been about effort. It is about results. And at some point in professional baseball, the gap between effort and results has to close. That's not cruelty. That's the reality of this level. Had he spoken to Ohtani about Rushing's development personally? Kershaw looked at the reporter who asked this question for a moment before answering. Shohei has been extraordinary in how he has approached this. What he has given to James in terms of time and knowledge and patience is something I have the deepest respect for. That's why I said what I said. Because if that level of investment hasn't moved the needle enough, I don't know what else this organization can offer. Ohtani's availability came after Kershaw's. The reporters who walked from one room to the other carried the weight of what they had just heard. The first question asked of Ohtani referenced Kershaw's comments directly. Ohtani listened to the question being read back to him. He did not react visibly to the words as they were spoken. When the question finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said this. Clayton speaks from a place of wanting to win. I understand that. I share that. As for James, my investment in him has not changed. What Clayton said is his perspective. My perspective is that development is not linear. I have not given up. I will not give up. The room absorbed that answer with the specific attention it deserved. Because what Ohtani had just done, quietly and without drama, was position himself in direct contrast to the veteran who had publicly suggested the project was finished. He had not criticized Kershaw. He had not created a conflict where there was room to avoid one. He had simply stated his own position with the clarity and the finality that characterizes everything he says. He had not given up. He would not give up. Rushing did not speak to the media after the game. That decision was made by the organization. Given the specific nature of the evening's events, given what had been said and by whom, the decision to shield him from the press conference environment was understandable. Necessary, even. But his absence from that room was its own statement. Because the questions that would have been directed at him were now circulating without his answers to shape them. The story of what Kershaw had said was going to exist in the public conversation without the voice of the person most directly affected by it having any opportunity to respond. That is a specific kind of difficulty. To be the subject of a story that is being told without you. Clayton said the thing that everyone has been not saying for 2 months. The only question now is what happens next. What happens next? That is the question that every person connected to this roster, this clubhouse, this organization went home carrying last night. Ohtani has not given up. Kershaw has said it may be over. And James Rushing is somewhere between those two positions, in the specific and brutal territory of a young player whose development has become a public debate conducted by legends while he watches from the outside. Baseball is a long season. Development is not linear. Ohtani said both of those things and he meant both of them. But Kershaw has been in this game long enough to know the difference between a process that is working slowly and a process that has reached its limit. Last night he decided that difference was no longer something he was willing to keep to himself. The room heard him. The whole sport heard him. And now everyone is waiting to see which one of them turns out to be right.